Good morning. It is a great pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you, President, Madam President, Minister, for the wonderful invitation. I am so impressed with the quality of this forum over the years and the importance of its subject. I also am very delighted to be back here in Korea. I first came to Korea in 1989, a very long time ago. I came here to do business with companies like Lucky Gold Star. It was then Lucky Gold Star, not LG, Samsung, Hyundai, all your great companies. And I have been visiting here ever since. Seoul is a wonderful city. Korea is a beautiful country. And South Korea and the United States, of course, are bound together by common history and shared values. We have lived for quite a long time in a time that is driven by the pace of technology and change. And yet we know that this era, this AI, AX era, is different than what has come before. We know the pace is different. We know the challenges are more difficult. We also know that the promise is real. But people are feeling increasingly dislocated, untethered from reality, disconnected from each other. In a way, we have entered a world that is too fast, too fleeting, a world that is too often fake or false. And we know that people are becoming socially disengaged as a result. Trust in institutions is declining. And yet this is the very time when we must harness the best of what our people in our communities, in our countries, in our companies. Now is the time when we must harness the best our people can deliver. When is it, why is it that people deliver their best? No matter how much change technology brings, people, in many ways, have always been the same. And people, human beings, all of us, do our best when we feel connected to those with whom we live and work. When we believe our work and our lives have purpose. And when we trust one another, and especially our leaders. In other words, if we are to ask people to deliver their best, to help us harness the promise of AI and solve its challenges, we must create connection, purpose, and trust. And that is the subject of my speech today. How do we preserve what is important and best? Connection, purpose, trust. While we reinvent all the rest, leverage all the great promise of this technology. But before I talk about how to create connection and purpose and trust, let us talk for a moment candidly honestly about where artificial intelligence is. As you know, there are many in the technology field, many in government, many in civil society, who are calling for a pause in the development of AI. Time to slow down, to reflect, to adjust. I think we must be realistic and acknowledge that there will be no pause. And there will be no pause because, to put it simply, there is too much money going into artificial intelligence. The amount of money that is being poured into this technological innovation by the giants in the technology industry is unprecedented. This is an arms race. And not only is AI on the fastest technology uptake curve in history, but it also has attracted more money than any innovation in the past and at a more rapid rate. So there will be no pause. There will be no slowdown. Secondly, we must be realistic and acknowledge that there are truly dangers in artificial intelligence. This is not hysterical talk to speak of some of these dangers. They are real, and we will not be able to prevent all of them. We will not be able to prevent all of them because technology innovation will not pause. And in fact, we will not be able to foresee all of the difficulties of this technology. Remember the advent of social media. It seems like a long time ago, but it wasn't. And social media has redefined our world in not always good ways. Yes, we communicate more. Yes, we connect more in some ways. But social media has also created more disconnection between people. It has made it easier for people to only speak to those like them. We have not figured out how to prevent disinformation, misinformation. And we know that many people use social media not to present an authentic version of the truth, but instead to present a curated version of the truth. And curation does not build trust. So, AI will create a set of problems that we do not yet understand, and we will not be able to prevent all of them. On the other hand, there is real promise with this technology. In particular, this technology has the promise to make education, as the minister suggested, more compelling, more personalized, more effective. I am chair of the largest living museum in the world, Colonial Williamsburg. You might ask why I care about history. I will come back to that. But AI has the potential to make history, our shared past, that is at the foundation of our connections to one another. AI has the opportunity to make history more engaging. It has the promise to make customer service far more satisfying, productivity higher. In fact, I think it is fair to say that artificial intelligence is becoming the de facto platform for education, for communication, for productivity. So, how do we respond? It is leadership's job to harness change for positive outcomes. That is a leader's job, to harness change for a positive outcome. And the only way a leader, any leader, can accomplish this, to harness change for positive outcome, is to get the best from people. Which brings me back to, how do we create connection and purpose and trust? Let us start with connection. Where does connection come from for people? It comes from shared experience. Shared experience. I remember when I first became the chief executive and chairman of Hewlett-Packard. We had a lot of change that we needed to make. We had fallen behind. We were no longer innovating. Other companies were fast outpacing us. But before we tackled change, we had to find, once again, our connection. And our connection came from our history. We began to speak in Hewlett-Packard about how we started, where we started, who started us, what were our shared values, and what did those values mean? And so we came to share, once again, an understanding of why innovation had been so important in our company's history and must be the driver of our company's future. Connection comes from shared experience. My connection with all of you comes from the experiences I have shared here in your country with your business and your education community. I am the chair of the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation because in the United States of America, we are forgetting our history. In the United States, most Americans do not know why America is a nation, how it came to be a nation. And so, as we approach our 250th anniversary as a nation in 2026, it is vital that all Americans understand our connection to a shared history and set of experiences. Connection does not mean that everybody agrees. Connection does not mean that we never have a difficult conversation. But connection is the human understanding that we are bound together and stronger together. And that connection is critical for any community, any company, any country. I encourage the businesses with whom I consult to regularly tell their employees their origin story. How did your company start? What are its core values? to create this connection. Purpose comes from knowing that work is worthwhile. And purpose requires a set of shared values and an understanding of why work matters. Everyone wants to have purpose in their life, in their work. And so it is leadership's job not just to create connection, but also to create purpose. This is why at Hewlett-Packard we spent so much time before we embarked on massive change. It is why we spent so much time talking about our core values, to give our work purpose and meaning. It is why, as the United States prepares to celebrate 250 years of history, we go back to the core values written in our Declaration of Independence, in our Constitution, in our Bill of Rights. Connection, purpose, trust. Trust might be the hardest of all. And trust, we know, is fraying all over the world. And we see the consequences of fraying trust. So how does a leader build trust? I think it starts with humility. It might be an unexpected word I use, humility. Let us face it, many technology leaders, most of Silicon Valley, would not be described as having humility. And yet, I think humility is vital for every leader, especially now. And what is humility? It is not lack of self-confidence. A leader must have self-confidence. But humility is knowing that you do not always get it right. Humility is acknowledging that a mistake might have been made. Humility is reaching out and saying, I cannot do this alone, I need help. And humility also is knowing I am not perfect, I do not get every answer right. People know their leaders aren't perfect. People know their leaders make mistakes. But somehow we trust more when we see a leader acknowledging what we all know to be true, that they are not perfect, that we all do need help, that we all do make mistakes and can acknowledge them. Second, I think leaders must display clear-eyed realism to build trust. What do I mean by clear-eyed realism? I mean saying what is our best knowledge of what's in front of us. Seems obvious, right? But we live in a world where hype is rewarded. Exaggeration is rewarded, where we oversell all the time. The people who are selling AI like to tell us about all the benefits, and they don't always tell us about the pitfalls. Clear-eyed realism is required of leaders. We will not get it right every time. Government cannot keep up with the pace of technology. We should be clear-eyed about that. Things will happen that we cannot foresee. And then we must be humble enough, clear-eyed enough to say, we did not see that coming. Now we must learn from our mistakes and adjust. Third, I think trust comes when leaders deliberate carefully, where they take the time to deliberate carefully. And this is very difficult now, because in a fast, fleeting world, leaders are pressured to decide everything like that. And yet, deciding everything like that causes more mistakes. Take the time, make the time to deliberate thoughtfully. That is why this forum is important. It is a time and a space for thoughtful deliberation. I think a leader builds trust as well by asking questions, lots and lots of questions. Leaders sometimes believe their job is to deliver answers, and sometimes it is. But more often than not, the most important thing a leader can do is ask the right question and act on the answer. Asking the right questions not only makes a leader smarter, gives a leader access to information they did not know, but also, very importantly, asking questions helps leaders avoid groupthink. I don't know if groupthink translates, but groupthink happens when everyone starts to think the same way. Groupthink happens in boardrooms all the time. Groupthink happens in lots of conference rooms all the time, where people start to all think the same way, and eventually something big gets missed. And so the ability to ask questions prevents that groupthink from happening. Another way that I think leaders need to build trust is to identify problems early and often, not for the purpose of being negative, but for the purpose of getting better, learning, adjusting, innovating, moving forward. A leader has to build a culture, I believe, where people are rewarded for asking questions and identifying problems. And that is sometimes difficult in organizations. Sometimes people are rewarded not for asking questions, but for having an answer. Sometimes people are rewarded not for identifying problems, but for delivering the solution. And yet, in an era where technology is hurtling forward, where we cannot predict all that will happen, a culture where people can raise their hand and say, we have a problem. I don't know the answer to this problem, but I know the questions I should start asking. These things help build trust in an organization, but more than that, they help an organization adapt, survive, thrive. I think AI will be a very bumpy ride. And so in that turbulent environment, asking questions and identifying problems is very important. It is interesting, but much of the proposed regulation around AI in the United States, in Europe, has focused in on the role of the whistleblower. And I think there is great wisdom in that, actually, because we need people who can raise their hands and say, we have a problem. We need to ask questions. One of the other things that I think is so incredibly important about this conference and is essential to building trust is the necessity for collaboration. And this is why building connection is so important, because in this world, no one can do it alone. No one is smart enough to have all the answers, even if they think they do. And so collaboration across boundaries is so important. Collaboration between academia, government, and industry, such as is on display at this conference. I have been advocating publicly in the United States for far more collaboration between the technology community, regulators, and the political establishment. That collaboration is very difficult in the United States, and yet it is absolutely essential. And collaboration across boundaries inside a company is absolutely essential as well. And again, collaboration sounds obvious, but our organizations, whether they are academic or government or industry, our organizations are built as hierarchies. Silos are real. People protect their territory. And so it is difficult to collaborate across all those boundaries, and yet vitally important. Trust, I think, is more important than ever. If we want the best from ourselves and the people we live and work with, we must trust each other. We must be connected to one another. We must find purpose and meaning in the work we do together. Trust, I think, is the most elusive and perhaps the most important of all. We already live in a world where it is hard to know what is authentic, what is real. It will become increasingly hard to distinguish the fake from the authentic. And so it is leadership's job to build trust. And I think that trust is built not when people get it right every time. Trust is built when leaders act with humility, when they stay clear-eyed and candid and realistic, when they deliberate carefully, when they ask the right questions, when they are not afraid to identify problems and to have others identify them as well, admit mistakes, willingly share, and collaborate with others. Connection, purpose, trust. We all need these things to be our best, to do our best. Preserve the best, reinvent the rest. A leader's job is to harness change for positive outcome. A leader's job is to preserve those things that build connection, purpose, trust. And a leader's job as well is to reinvent everything else, to leverage the promise of technology, to move forward, to make education more compelling, to make history come alive. Preserve the best and reinvent the rest. In an era of such massive technological change, never has leadership been more important. And ultimately, leadership is the most human endeavor of all. A leader can use technology. A leader can leverage technology. But in the end, a leader's job is to lead people and to preserve what people need: connection, purpose, and trust. Thank you so very much for having me.
네, 여러분 다시 한번 큰 박수 보내주시기 바랍니다. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation.